In 8th grade, we were assigned an oral history book report. So I used to frequent this secondhand bookstore. And this book jumped out at me. It was like bloody red letters, and it said Eichmann, Final Solution. And I picked it up and I started reading it. And I had heard about the Holocaust because we had Holocaust survivors, not many, but a few in our synagogue. But I didn't know the detail. I didn't know Jews made into soap. I didn't know the gas chambers to that extent. I didn't have detail. I went, oh my God, this is the book that's going to change minds and hearts. So I give my book report. Before I reach my chair, a girl raises her hand. My father said Hitler built good roads for Germany. And the nun agrees with her and says, yes, that is true. Hitler did build good roads for Germany. My heart starts to sink. And then the conversation, of course, goes to, would he go to heaven or hell? Because that's all we ever talked about or cared about. I figured as a Jew, I'd burn in purgatory for a while, but eventually get to heaven. Nope. If Hitler repented sincerely at the very last moment, he would get to heaven because he was a baptized Catholic. But the Jews will suffer Holocausts, persecutions, etc., forever, never see the face of God or enter heaven until they accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Yasmine Mohammed podcast. Today, my guest is an incredibly special woman. Her name is Rachel Wahba. Rachel, I guarantee you, is the only Egyptian-Iraqi Jew who was born in India and grew up in Japan that you've ever met in your life. So I'm really excited to speak to Rachel today and to learn all about her life and all of her different ethnicities and how they've all worked together. So as I mentioned, she is a Mizrahi Jew and a Zionist activist. The many dimensions of her exile and displacement in the first 20 years of her life are a constant theme in her work as a writer, content creator, former psychotherapist, and her advocacy as an advisory board member of the Jews Indigenous to the Middle East and North Africa. She's also a co-founder of Olivia Travel, a company dedicated to curating travel experiences for lesbian and queer women for the past 35 years. Wow, that is a lot. All right, Rachel, we got to start at the beginning because obviously your background is so unique. So I want to talk about that. An Egyptian-Iraqi Jew who was born in India and grew up stateless in Japan. So if you could somehow consolidate all of these different identities, give us a little synopsis of how these identities collide to create you, and how did you navigate all of these identities? So I want to know both about growing up in Japan and today. Are you in America right now?
I am. I'm in San Francisco.
Okay, so that's yet another
Yeah,
yet another notch. So tell me about all of that. How has your Jewish identity been a factor in navigating your sense of self throughout all of these different cultural groups?
I think my Jewish identity is what kept me alive, probably. I had nothing else. My parents were very proud. My mother was a proud Iraqi Jew. My dad was a very proud Egyptian Jew. And I don't know what it is about Egyptians, but they really think they're special.
Yeah,
And it was just this thing, and they both had backgrounds. They had a life in a country, and they felt that they belonged to, even though it was much harder for my mother in Baghdad than it was for my dad, who was born in Mansoura, and then he went to Cairo at 18. But they had a background. They came from somewhere. I didn't. I mean, yes, I was on my father's passport for my first 2 years. And here it is. So he was always so proud.
You get you theoretically could get Egyptian citizenship today?
Would I want it? But no, probably not. what happened was I was not stateless for the first 2.5 years of my life, and then I
Mhm.
became stateless. Like I was born in India, never Indian, right?
Sorry, I'm gonna have to, there's a lot here to unpack. Tell me about how you became stateless. So your father is
I will.
Egyptian and you
Yes.
should be Egyptian, but okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so what happened was this. My father left India in 1949 to
Hmm.
go to Japan because he was an import exporter.
Hmm.
And I mean, it's such a long story. So the how I became stateless was I'm born in India. They both had fled their countries. Dad in
Hmm.
39. Can I go back there like how it
Yes, of
happened?
course. I want to
Okay.
hear
So
about all of that ethnic cleansing. Yeah.
yeah, so dad, they left before the ethnic cleansing.
Hmm.
So dad left in 1939. He was a clerk at a department store in Cairo, and he started seeing all that Mein Kampf was a bestseller.
Mm.
And he said, it's over. It's over. The rest of his family stayed, except him and his brother and another brother. They went to Japan, started an import-export business. The business was to the Middle East countries, sheets to Iraq, contacts there, um, China ware, everything you think of, keffiyehs, everything they manufactured in Japan, sent it to the Middle Eastern contacts. War breaks out and dad knew war was going to break out in Japan. He went to India. My mother had already fled Iraq after the Farhud. So she was in
Mhm.
the Farhud in 1941. Her mother, who was an Iraqi Jew but grew up in Singapore, had a British passport, got the family out in 1943. They met in India, sort of an arranged marriage. She had a crush on some European, a British guy in the Jewish club in Bombay. Family went, whoop, 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 whoop. She's already 20 anyway, get her married. Musa Wahba, my dad, was infatuated with her. They had 2 dates with a chaperone. She said, I'll grow to love him. She did.
Mm.
Um, Fortunately, he adored her and she ran the house. So at least I grew up in a matriarchal family. But okay, so India, 1949, India now has independence. I'm 3.5 years old, and it's time for them to find a future somewhere else. So the only option turned out to be Japan. Okay, dad's in Japan, 1949. We're supposed to follow him within a month. My mother is 6 months pregnant. Me, I'm a 3.5-year-old, very opinionated, unwieldy child. I was not easy. And dad was gone, and I was furious. And why are we there? And why is she sick with her pregnancy? And why is
Mm.
everybody freaking out? So um, here's the beginning of the statelessness. So my father was promised by the Egyptian consul that he would get my mom and me to Japan within a month. She goes to the consulate. He goes, well, your husband, Musa, he's not going to be Egyptian very much longer. We can't help you.
Mm. Mm.
Go to
Mm.
the Iraqi consulate. You're Iraqi. Go to the Iraqi consulate. She goes to the Iraqi consulate. Sorry,
Same
you're
thing.
married to an Egyptian. We can't help you. She goes to the Indian consul. You're a married woman. Don't talk to us. We have nothing to do with you. We can't help you. Goes to the International Red Cross. You're not refugees. We can't help you. 1 year of her going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. We get to Japan exactly 1 year later. I'm 4.5. We get to Japan in 1950. Now, Japan was not rebuilt yet. World War II. Um, get to Japan, they hadn't seen very many foreigners. We were unfortunately living half an hour away from Kobe, where all the foreigners were. We took the train all the time to do whatever our social, our school, everything was in the international community. But I lived in a town where I stuck out. And so color was an issue. Brown was not, no, they were not a fan of brown skin in
Mhm.
1950. As a matter of fact, when I went to visit, oof, like maybe 10, 15 years ago, I've gone again, but I saw a sign for suntan lotion in Japan. I grew up with, the umbrellas came out when the sun
Yeah.
came out. So the years I grew up there were very, very difficult because A, we're stateless. And the Japanese authorities would come to the house and say, "When are you leaving?" And one time I was with my dad, and the guy was like, "So when are you leaving?" Because it made them very uncomfortable to have stateless people there. You can't deport anyone stateless. So finally, I heard my dad snap and say, "Ask Nasser.
Right.
We'll leave." Now, maybe you might have a question, which people have asked me
I
a lot.
do.
Okay,
Hmm.
what's your question?
No, you tell me what the question is. People ask you a lot. It
Okay,
might be the same
okay. The
one.
one of the questions is, so why didn't you go to Israel?
Oh, okay.
Since
No, that wasn't my
1950s,
question.
there's an Israel already.
Mm.
There was no way we were going to Israel. A, we didn't have money. B, what were we going to do? Join our relatives in the tents in the
Yeah,
Ma'bar?
that wasn't my question. My question was what is the story behind Egypt? So when they said he's not going to be Egyptian much longer, what's that about?
They canceled his passport. So in the early 50s, before 56, when the entire family was kicked out, they started up Egyptian nationals that were that were not, that were Jews, okay? That were
Yep.
Jews, lost their passports. They were
Mhm.
useless.
Mhm. So if you
So
left the
even though it
country, if
hadn't
you're,
expired yet, it hadn't even expired,
yeah.
but it was useless.
Mhm. So if
So
you're a
that's what,
Jewish person and you've left Egypt, you basically can't get back with your
and
Egyptian passport.
and
You're
he
no
was
longer.
so proud, it says on his passport,
Hmm.
and by birth, we don't know any family on his father's side that came from anywhere else besides Egypt. They were peasants in Midran, and they were an old Egyptian family, very proud. As a matter of fact, there
Hmm.
was a village that they called Kfar Wahba because it was so populated by our extended family. His mother's
Hmm.
side were more recent. They were Sephardic, and they were more recent, meaning like what, 10, 5 generations, 6 generations, Spain, Turkey, Morocco, la la la, Egypt. So that was my dad's background. My mom, they just knew nothing besides Iraq, which probably, and they lived on the border, the Iran border, Shahraban, which is where their name comes from, Sharbani, and that probably a lot of back and forth there with Persian and Iraqi. So,
No.
like I was saying earlier, they were very proud. They had a nationality. I had zero
Hmm.
nationality. So
Hmm.
as I was growing up, I started to think, okay, my nationality is Jew. My parents are
Hmm.
free, and my nationality is Jew. And that was all I had.
But
And
your
then,
mom, I mean,
pardon?
you saw from your dad's side how Egypt was treating him because he was Jewish. Did your mom speak to you about the Farhud, or
Yeah.
later in life? Of course, not when you were that young.
Oh, when I was that young, my
Mm.
family, uh, nothing was spared. I had a grandmother who actually I take after, which was my mother's nightmare. Like, oh my God, I lived through her and now I have you. It was a big deal. I was like, just like Granny. But my grandmother lived with us. My grandfather lived with us. That's a whole other story. My aunt, my uncle, we all lived together. And Granny was traumatized by Iraq. So Granny's story figures very much in my psyche, and she lived till 105, almost 105.
Mm.
So she was in my life. She died after my mother, after my father. And they used to say Granny's going to bury all of us. Well, so she was a force. Now, this woman was born and raised in Singapore, Iraqi family who had left Baghdad, gone to India, made a business, went to Singapore, became very successful. She grew up very privileged in Singapore. met this guy, an Iraqi Jew who worked for her father, married him. Then suddenly he was called back to Iraq because his mother was blind, his father died. All the men in the family were either dead or useless. He had to go take care of his unmarried sister and his mother. Granny thinks, oh, exotic, Baghdad. Yeah, wow,
Mhm.
right? Alibaba, whatever. She gets there and she sees a horror show. Now, this was not a rich family, they were barely middle class. So they were terrified for their lives. There was no economic cushion, there was nothing. And they were cursing her on the street. And at home, they were cursing her because she was modern. She danced, she cut her hair, she wore lipstick, she was gahba. She was gahba at home and she was gahba on the street. At home, because she was modern, she's a whore. On the street, because she's a Jew, she's a whore. She was furious because, again, she had 15, 16 years of growing up normal. She comes to Iraq and she said, what are these Jews? What are these Jews? They're like mice. They won't open their mouths. And she's yelling back on the street. Well, Granny didn't get it until one day she went to a dinner party in Baghdad. She was also socializing outside the family. That was a no-no. So she's got three kids. She goes outside the family. She goes to dinner with this woman that she was so pleased, loved her. Now, Granny played the piano. Granny spoke English. She seemed very, she was cultured. A very wealthy Syrian couple. The husband was a doctor. The woman really liked Granny. They played piano together, so forth and so on. Granny goes to a dinner party. The family is like shocked. You can't do that. She's like, I'm doing it. She goes to this dinner party. She's sitting there, and all of a sudden she finds out who's the guest of honor, the Grand Mufti,
Oh.
Hajj al Hussein, Amin el Husseini. The Grand Mufti is the guest of honor, and he starts talking. And he starts talking about getting rid of the Jews. Hitler's not doing it fast enough, but it's going to happen. And all the Jews, it's going to be taken care of. There is a final solution.
Oh.
She comes home frozen, terrified. And she said to me, I didn't know how much they hated us. I thought it was just the hooligans on the street bullying my son, pissing in the bottle of mango pickle he goes to buy because he's a Jew, beating him up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know the story. It was a very, it wasn't fun. So whoever says Jews had it great in the Middle East,
Mm.
I don't know where they lived. So at any rate, um, then 2 years later, or not 2 years later, sorry, shortly after that dinner party, I think that was when the Farhud happened. And they lived in a mixed neighborhood of Christians, some Muslims, Jews, right near the Jewish quarter. So my mother was not in the Jewish quarter where some of our family was. I mean, that was a terror to end up in the Jewish quarter. It was a slum. And but the screams never left her body. The screams, the screams, the screams, the shooting the guns in the air, kill the Yahud, blah, 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 blah. She said, we were always scared, but this was another level. And they ran on rooftops to a relative's house where there were men, because my grandfather was, oh, by the way, already in India trying to make a business so he could bring my mother and all of them over because the family said, you can't leave her here. She's going to get all of us killed. My grandmother was going to get all of us killed because she yelled back. I mean, she had stuff like, people would stop her. Hey, you, Gahba. Hey, you, that daughter's for me when the time comes, and that one's for me. And she goes, they were dividing us. So she, 1943, on her British passport, 2 years again of haggling with Iraqi authorities, got out, got to Bombay. So yeah, my family, no, there was no, it was open. Everybody talked. My mother was much more, let's just move on, move on. Dad was a romantic. He remembered all the wonderful things about Egypt. Um, And I was always confused, like, well, they took your passport away. What? Because yes, but with him, there was a yes, but. And he would have gone to Israel, even poor, um, instead of staying. We stayed in Japan 20 years before getting American immigration. My parents applied in 1948. We were still in India for American citizenship, but there was no path. There was no path, and there was no path for them until 1968. And I was already in the US because I had come in 64 on my Red Cross papers. Not a
Did you?
flattering picture.
Oh, that is
I
cute. That's
know,
adorable.
but
I
that's,
love your hair.
yeah, I straightened it. All
Very
I wanted to do
60s.
was be American. That was it.
So were you in for 20 years in Japan, you were stateless the whole time? Or did you finally get
Stateless
citizenship
actually
there?
more than that. Well, okay, so I was stateless in Japan, living it from 14 to 18. Then at 18, sorry, age four
Hmm.
till 18 in Japan. I'm terrible with numbers. So
Hmm.
from age 4 to 18, we're in Japan, completely stateless, waiting for our number. I never knew what that meant, number. It's a lottery number. It's an immigration lottery number. Of course, we didn't get it. That's a whole long story. But so I'm 18. No future for you here. You have to go to the
Hmm.
United States. You got to go to college. They eked up whatever they had to send me to a state college in Los Angeles. It was called Valley State. It's San Francisco. I mean, it's California State Northridge now. And I was absolutely thrilled to be in the United States. But yes, going back to Japan, I was only thrilled for 6 months. Then I wanted to go back, and I'll tell you why. But let me go back to Japan.
Hmm.
So in Japan, being stateless had a lot of repercussions. It had repercussions on every level. It was humiliating. I was in an international community. Everybody had a country. Where are you from?
Right.
Nowhere? Um, I'm a Jew. What's your nationality? I'm a Jew. That's a religion. No, it's my nationality. What am I going to say? My parents are my country? So, um, and then we didn't have money. There were two possible schools. One was a Protestant missionary school, but it was not a proselytizing school. It was a school that was built for all the kids from Protestant missionary families who were scattered all over Japan, and it was called the Canadian Academy. It was a conglomeration of a lot of Protestant missionary schools, and their kids went there, and the kids were in the dorm. It was open to all the business community, consulate people, whoever was in Japan, their children, but we paid for the cost of everything. So it was very, very expensive. My parents did not have the money to send me there till high school. And I don't know that I would really be alive if I hadn't gone to that school, honestly, because by the end of eighth grade, I would not be able to talk to you right now. Could not look at anybody in the face. It's hard for me not to cry right now, remembering all that. I don't want to cry. Um, I was a mess. But despite what a mess I was, I never stopped opening my mouth. So in third grade, I had a nun that I loved and she loved me. And because she loved me, she took my hand one day and stood me in front of the main crucifix, which is enormous, in the hallway. And she said, look what it says above his crown of thorns. Or is it, yeah, it's in Latin. It's a Jesus, King of the Jews. Look, he was a Jew just like you. Why don't you convert? And I said, in third grade, if he's a Jew, why do I have to convert? Of course, I was punished, not by that nun, by the head nun. But this goes on, lots of bullying over the years, a lot. And most of those years, I was the only Jew in the class. And these are small classes, so bullying is very easy when you have 12 girls in a class. and many of them are studying for conversion. And so in eighth grade, and this was a really, really big awakening for me. In eighth grade, we were assigned an oral history book report. And I used to frequent this secondhand bookstore near the train station. And he had a lot of English speaking, English books and comic books from the GIs. But there were a lot of English books that foreigners who came, and then when they left, they sold their books. And this book jumped out at me. It was like bloody red letters, and it said Eichmann, Final Solution, and it had the iconic picture of the men in the bunks in Auschwitz with the hollow eyes. And I picked it up and I started reading it. And I was either 13 or 13, yeah. And I had heard about the Holocaust because we had Holocaust survivors, not many, but a few in our synagogue. But I didn't know the detail, right? I didn't know Jews made into soap. I didn't know the gas chambers to that extent. I didn't have detail. I read this book. I got it all at 13. I went, oh my God, this is the book. This is the book that's going to change minds and hearts, right? This is going to change it all. They're going to
Now
get
that
it,
they know, yeah.
right? So I give my book report. Before I reach my chair, back to my desk, a girl raises her hand. My father said Hitler built good roads for Germany. She was half German, half Japanese. Her father was a Nazi sympathizer. Everybody knew it. You know, we had to grow up, we had to relate to everybody. It was a small international community. I knew her since first grade. So Helga raises her hand and says that. And the nun agrees with her and says, yes, yes, that is true. Hitler did build good roads for Germany. My heart starts to sink. And then the conversation, of course, goes to, would he go to heaven or hell? Because that's all we ever talked about or cared about. I figured as a Jew, I'd burn in purgatory for a while, but eventually get to heaven. Nope. If Hitler repented sincerely at the very last moment, he would get to heaven because he was a baptized Catholic. But the Jews will suffer holocausts, persecutions, etc., forever, never see the face of God or enter heaven until they accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. Now that shoots me right up to today, and we'll go back again, but up to today, October 7th, was many American Jews and Jews around the world and Israeli Jews even, they got it. After October 7th, I'm sure many thought, no, now, people will understand anti-Semitism. Now they'll understand Islamic Jew hatred. No, the opposite happened.
That was literally my tweet on October 7th was I was like, well, now everyone's going to understand. Now everyone's going to get it. Now they'll stop thinking that I'm being an alarmist when I'm trying to, you know, scream about these things and trying to tell the world the truth. Boy, was I devastatingly wrong.
And, you know, I was like, yeah, of course, what? Yeah, this is not a shock. What was a shock to me were the feminists. That was a shock. I didn't expect the world to care. I didn't expect this Islamic rage that's going on to be for the West to go, okay, stop now, you've gone too far. No, I didn't expect that, but I did expect feminists.
Mm.
And no, the responses I got from some people were unbelievable. Stop sending me these posts. They're triggering. Black people are still trying to wrapping their minds around George Floyd. Please don't send me this. Uh, I don't want to scar my soul. Don't send me this. And these are our artists that we hire Our people on Olivia trips. Now, most of our customers, our guests are not that. But the people I was in contact with, some of our employees, that was their stance. These are freedom fighters. They're resisting.
Oh,
Feminists, radical lesbian feminists, queer women.
yeah. Now, can I have to ask you now because you're someone who has a more direct contact with these people than I do, because I genuinely can't wrap my head around that. Can you explain to me how you can be a lesbian and a feminist and then support a group like Hamas? Like, how do they not see the contradiction? Is it from a place of true ignorance of understanding who Hamas are? Like, even saying that, I can't even believe myself because we all saw the videos. We know what happened on October 7th. We all saw Shani Luke on the truck that day. We all know of all of the women that were raped and murdered on that day. So, and children and unarmed men, obviously, and kidnapped, et cetera, et cetera. So how, when they support this terrorist group that could do that to innocent people, are they truly not understanding who they're supporting? Is it from a place of ignorance? Because if it's not, then the only other alternative is it's from a place of just pure hatred for Jewish people, pure disdain for their existence and for their lives, and you just don't care that this has happened to them. And so, because as far as I'm concerned, there should be no moral ambiguity here. But especially if you're a lesbian, knowing that this group kills people like you, like they will execute you for being homosexual and for being a feminist, knowing how this group treats women, how they did treat women on October 7th. Like what is the where do you think where is the psychosis coming from? What is the root?
I think it is Jew hatred. I think it's envy. It's hideous amount of envy. Um, I've been curating my social world since 1978. Back then, Jewish lesbian feminists were having, I went to a party. I met the woman that I ended up being with for 31 years. We're not together anymore. We still run the company together, but we're not together. I met her at this party, Jewish feminist, radical lesbian feminist in 1978. And on the wall, big picture of Arafat.
Hmm.
So this goes way back, right? This is Marxist thinking. This is blah, 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 right? Freedom fighters. Um, in 1980, I wrote an article, an essay in a book, Nice Jewish Girls. It was an anthology, all lesbian Jewish girls. My chapter was called Some of Us Are Arabic. I was trying to say, hey, 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 we're not just bad white people.
Hmm.
Um, and I also was my first chance at saying who I was. And I was for many years happily tokenized by having to submit things for anthologies and so forth as a Mizrahi Arabic Jew. And people at that time didn't even understand why I wasn't anti-Zionist, because I've always been a Zionist. And so Nice Jewish Girls comes out, and then we have in Berkeley a Jewish Feminist Conference, 1981. 1981, most of the women in there were lesbian feminists, but they weren't, it wasn't all lesbian. Very progressive group, however. And on the stage, I read my piece from Some of Us Are Arabic. And in there, it shows that I'm Zionist. And a Jewish woman raises her hand and starts screaming. If one Palestinian has to die for Israel to exist, it must not.
Hmm.
Okay. And there's the mentality. Now we fast forward today. In my curated list, I lost a few friends. Why? Not because they necessarily support Hamas, because obviously I wouldn't have friends like that at this day and age. But this was the answer. Men do that in war. It's a war. The Palestinians are oppressed and they're resisting. And that's a
Now
Jew.
imagine, if you can, you're going to have to really use your imagination on this one. Imagine, if you can, an IDF soldier raping Palestinian women that happen to be at a music festival. Would they say the same thing? Would they come up with any kinds of excuses saying, well,
Of
it's
course not.
war. That's what you do in war.
But no, of course not, because to be a Jew is illegitimate, right? We're not going to see the face of God. We're never entering heaven. We are evil. We are scum. We are dirty. We are awful. Kill us.
So whether it's coming from the Muslim people, whether it's coming from Christian people, or whether it's coming from the Marxist, progressive, leftist, all three groups are all just possessed with hatred for Jewish people.
Yes and no. I mean, when you scratch and scratch and scratch the surface and get deeper, yes, I'm afraid so. Just go away. They need us to go away. It's like, I don't know, one of the things as a therapist, I love the work of Heinz Kohut, and Heinz Kohut talked about mirroring a lot. And I really gravitated to it because mirroring is what gives you self-confidence, and I never had any. And so, how do you get mirrored? You get mirrored by somebody reflecting you back, and you reflect each other, right? So, I didn't have that. So, I gravitated to his work. But what he says is that envy comes from any group or person who feels like you're better than them. Now, when you feel envy, it's not just jealousy. Jealousy is about, okay, you have this, I don't, I want it, I'm going to try and get it, or maybe I'll steal it from you, but it's not murderous rage. Envy is, you make me feel bad about myself, so you got to go.
And you
That,
don't deserve it. I don't know if that's a part of envy or not, but I'll tell you that's a part
no,
of the
it's, I
anti-Semitism and
deserve
the
it. I
Arabism.
deserve it, and I will never have it
Mhm.
as long as you are still around.
Even if I have all of it, it doesn't matter. You don't deserve any of it. That's
I think
it's a
I think it's worse than that, Yasmine. I think it's your mere existence makes me feel bad about myself. Just look. Jesus is a Jew. We go, yeah, yeah, that's nice. You can have him. The early
Mhm,
Jews who went along became Christians. The other Jews who didn't become Christians are like, just leave us alone.
mhm,
You can have your God. It's good. Jesus is your God. Very nice. We don't want it.
mhm.
That's a terrible insult. Then Muhammad comes.
It's
Of
same
course, the
insult.
Jews are going to follow, right?
Yeah.
Many tribes did,
Mhm,
but those of us who didn't, didn't.
Yeah,
How
it's
dare
that
you?
same,
Who do you
how
think
dare
you
you?
are?
You think you're too good for my religion?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to get you.
Yeah, it's interesting because there is a lot of anger towards Christians, Jews, and all non-Muslims in general in the Quran. Like, obviously, they would have treated Christians in the same way of like, do you think you're too good for our God? You think you're too good to convert to Islam? But for some, the anger towards Jewish people is way more, way
Yeah,
more.
I've always wondered why. I mean, we're smaller. I mean, we're a much smaller population. Maybe that. I don't know why we're hated even more.
Yeah, I don't know because there's like a dehumanization of Jewish people, calling them apes and pigs in the Quran. That doesn't
Yeah,
happen with other groups of people. Even
yeah.
when they talk about Hindus and polytheists and Zoroastrians, etc., they should just be killed. It's almost like it's not with anger. It's just like, well, they can convert or die. These are the two options. These are the choices. It's like a surgical decision. But with Jews, it's like with viciousness, with anger, with disdain.
Mhm.
So, I mean, some people have talked about the fact that um, Muhammad was rejected by a Jewish woman, and that's why he's got that, which,
Right.
checks out. If you're a narcissist and you're rejected by a woman, then you're gonna have that kind of a reaction. But it really is quite shockingly different than it is for the hate for everybody else.
Yeah. And the world goes along with it.
Yeah. It's
You
you
know,
know,
sorry.
no, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, so I started blogging about 12 years ago, and I wrote an article, Huffington Post in 2017, after Linda Sarsour hijacked the Women's March.
Yeah.
And I was having her Sharia fittings. And not her Sharia, I mean a hijab fittings. And Sharia was somehow being normalized. It's okay, right? It's cultural, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote a piece and I put a little picture of myself, you know, angry little
Mm-hmm.
self, and basically said Sharia is not progressive. Huffington Post had it up for 1 week, took it down. It was Islamophobic. So I didn't not quit there. I then rewrote it and said, Sharia is abuse, illegalized abuse of girls and women, and I put it on my blog on the Times of Israel. But that's the thing, it's like you write this stuff and you get all this hatred back and you're Islamophobic. I mean, I write about my family story and feminists in a feminist newsletter write back, Rachel Wahba is just coming from her own little family history. What? It just, it's
You can't win.
insane. And I have
Yeah.
been marginalized and, I've made my own world. I have my own bubble and I have my own world and I make it work for me, but it feels absolutely terrible that this community that I serve, in fact, we have taken some 300,000 women all over the world in the last 35 years. We have we have all kinds of initiatives that help girls in underprivileged countries. In Nepal, we helped the Kamlari. They were house servants, but basically slaves, and we helped the movement and to eradicate it and to give the girls money to continue in life, so forth, with an organization, beautiful organization called Nepal Youth Organization. We are now having an initiative. My granddaughter is ahead of it, um, helping helping girls running away from FGM in Tanzania, be creating a safe house. Do you think that we could get money from our people for any of these Jewish girls or for any PTSD of the raped girls,
Mm.
of the Nova survivors? Not in a million years. And it enrages me.
I have heard similar sentiments from so many Jewish people recently who are talking about how they were part of this progressive movement in the West, in America, Canada, Australia. They believed in it. Like you said, they spent so much of their time and energy helping others, helping other minorities, helping other groups of women and girls you know, and when October 7th happened, they almost got whiplash at how shocked they were at the people that they had spent so much time, energy, money, blood, sweat, tears supporting, turn their back on them so quickly. And it just is so heartbreaking because every person I speak to feels like, why? Like they think it has something to do with them. You know what I mean? They feel like, what could I have done differently? What could I have said differently? How
Mhm.
much more could I have helped? Do
Mm,
you know what I mean? And that's
mm,
that's what breaks my heart
mm,
is because they just immediately start to think of like, how could I have done better? Because it's the alternative is to just accept that no matter what you did, no matter how much you helped, no matter how much you served, the hate was still going to be there.
Mhm.
You know, you don't want to believe that. Like we project onto others. If you have a good heart and you believe in, you just assume that the people that you're working with or the people that you see on the street or the people that you interact with are also going to have a good heart and treat you in the same way you treat them, you know? And then to find out that that's not true, that's a traumatic event for people,
That's right. That's
you
right.
know, on top of everything else.
That's right. And our crime is that we have in Israel now. Anti-Zionism is just repackaged old, stinky, stinky, disgusting old Jew hate, right? There's no
Mhm.
difference. Um, but we are not allowed to be sovereign. We are not allowed to be in charge of our own fate. Not allowed.
And
You
the irony here is that they're proving exactly why you do need your own sovereign
correct,
state. You
correct.
know? Like
That's it.
you're being so anti-Zionist and hateful and angry and pro-Hamas and this and that and the other thing, and that's exactly proving the point. That's, when I was in Israel, I felt like I was saying to my friend, like you feel like you are surrounded by, I mean, it was shortly after October 7th, so maybe that's why I felt it so palpable, but you are surrounded by traumatized people. These are people who are enjoying every single ray of sunshine, every single note of music, every single taste of every single morsel of food. They love life and they
Mhm,
want to give love and they
mhm,
want everyone around them to feel love and to feel joy and to feel gratitude. That's what happens when you've gone through trauma. And
mhm.
you know, it would be nice to be able to say it was generational trauma, but it never is. Like Jewish people never have an opportunity.
Right,
You're carrying the trauma of all of the generations before you, but there are no gaps in the
right.
generations, it's just continuously carrying generation after generation in your DNA. So it's like the the push for to be so loving and humane and caring and giving is almost to a contradictory degree. And I'll explain what I mean by that. First of all, when I went to the Nova Memorial,
Mhm.
um, what it is they've planted a tree for every soul that was lost on that day.
Yeah,
So basically what they took this darkness, this sadness, and they said, we are going to plant life out of this. Oxygen, growth, beauty, right? When I say it's to a contradictory degree, it's because your enemy is exactly the opposite of you.
mhm,
As much as you love and value life, your enemy has nothing but disdain for life. Osama bin Laden, and it's been repeated so many times since, has said, you will never win because you love life and
yeah,
we love death.
yeah.
And that really sums it up. That is exactly it. I mean, when I was visiting the I forgot the word now. What's the word for the people that live together in communes in
Kibbutz,
Israel? Yeah, the
Moshav.
kibbutz. Yes. When I was visiting a kibbutz and they were showing us that people from Gaza had taken things like it was supposed to be turned into plumbing or whatever, like HVAC equipment and things like that, and they turned them into bombs.
Mhm.
And then the exact opposite. was happening in Israel, where I would see like bomb shelters that were riddled with bullets, and people from the kibbutz had gone and like painted around the bullet holes and turned it into something beautiful. So while one side is taking something useful and good and turning it into something that causes death and destruction, the other side is taking death and destruction and turning it into something good, you know? And it's like if you're not playing the same game, you're not playing by the
No,
same rules.
no, you're
You're not
not.
even on the same planet. You know
No.
what I mean? Like this is like two completely different mindsets. And that's what terrifies me,
Yeah.
is because when you see something like, oh, Israeli surgeons, you know, worked on Yahya Sinwar and
Right.
cured his fucking brain tumor that he had, or um, you saved his life and then he engineered October 7th. You know, like that's the microcosm. That's the perfect little, that's what we're talking about here. And so it's like you have to get to the point where you have to believe, you have to accept, as difficult as it is, you have to accept in the darkness of humanity. You have to accept that evil exists. Because as long as you continue to believe that everybody is good, that they just want their own land to live peacefully on, that,
Right.
you know, at the end of the day, if we save this child's life and if we, you know, they have an organ transplant or something, that this boy is going to grow up to love Israelis. No, his parents are going to raise him to say, okay, good, I'm glad you lived. Now you can be a shaheed and die. Fisabilillah. Like that's
Yeah.
these people exist.
Yeah.
And
That's
until
the
you can look
reality.
it in the eye and accept it, you're not going to keep yourself safe.
That's right. You're
And
not.
it's
And
a
then
hard lesson to learn.
it's a horrible lesson to learn.
You don't want to tell someone
Absolutely
that.
horrible. You
Yeah.
know, when I first came to the US, nobody knew about Mizrahi Jews. Nobody had a clue. No Jews. 1964, the Persians were not in Los Angeles yet. They didn't come till like the late 70s. So I'm in Los Angeles. I'm so excited. I'm going to be in a country with Jews and I can, wow, wow, Jews, wow. And they'd look at me like, wait, your parents are from Egypt and Iraq? Oh, then you're not Jewish. You're an Arab, right? That went on and on. Now, when I try to talk about being that I'm an Arabic Jew, which people get all, it's such an issue. It's like, no, if you're
Hmm.
a Jew, you're not Arabic. I'm like, I
Hmm.
agree, I'm not an Arab because we were never allowed to be Arab. We were never good enough to be Arab. But when you live in a country for thousands of years, and in that time there's a conquest, and something called the Muslim conquest, and you live under that for another what, thousand year, whatever years, you're going to be acculturated, right? No. Or, well, you're an Arab Jew. Come on, join JVP, right? Jewish
Mm.
Voice for Peace. Jewish Voice for Peace, you know, Jewish Voice for Annihilation. So
Mm.
it's just this craziness. And then the West romanticizing the hijab and romanticizing the hideous, hideous sexism besides the death cult, all right? Romanticizing all this is insanity.
Yes,
And
it is.
then 9/11 happens, right? My grandmother, still alive, she never lost a brain cell, by the way, calls me up. Rachel, Rachel, they're here. And I'm like,
Mm.
okay, Granny, calm down, calm down. This is going to be a war. It'll be settled. No, not only is it not settled, it's as if it never happened. Who remembers 9/11? Yeah, you celebrate the day, whatever, you commemorate the day. Who really took it seriously? And I bumped into people. I was working at a gay mental health clinic at the time. Oh, come on, Americans deserved it. Look what they've been doing all these years to these countries. I am terrified of what is going on. It's a huge wave. And we are, even though I say these words, we're asleep.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I didn't agree with you, but unfortunately I do. There's nothing it's true. It's just true. And I don't know what it's going to take to wake us up, but we better wake up soon because, all of our lives depend on it. We have been raised, trained, you know, indoctrinated to believe that we can only criticize the West, that all other cultures are pure and lovely and wonderful and exotic. And we criticize ourselves to the point of self-hate. And it's a perfect recipe because they hate us too. So
Mhm.
they're hating us and we're hating ourselves, and it's like this really, toxic relationship. One that where we will ultimately, fail clearly. Like they will win.
Mhm.
They will win if we don't learn to stand by our values unapologetically, proudly. I know in America it's been a similar thing as it has been in Canada. I mean, of course I know Thanksgiving Day just passed, and all over all of my feeds are all of these posts about how Americans should be ashamed of themselves, how they're settlers, how they this and how they that, and Columbus never discovered anything, and like, you know what I mean? Like taking a day where you should be feeling, thankful. That's the day, Thanksgiving. Let's make it about that. No, it's a day of let's self-flagellate.
Yeah.
Let's engage in some more self-hate. And that's the first step in that's psyops right there. Like if you just think of any abusive relationship, that's what usually the male will do to the female is he will get her to diminish herself completely, to hate herself, and then it's really easy to control her. And so, yes, it is very scary to me that we are so ingrained in that self-hate area right now, and we need to go back to talking about, I recently had Ayan Hirsiali on this podcast, and she was saying, like, we focus so much on all of the negatives, but we never talk about the positives. We talk about slavery, but we never talk about how it was the West that abolished slavery, right? We never talk
Exactly.
about the Arab slave trade that went on for way longer than any British or European or slave trade in the West. We never talk about that. But yeah, that's what we need to start doing. We have to be, you were talking about how your dad feels so proud to be an Egyptian. Yes, that's a thing. They are incredibly proud to be Egyptians. Arabs are incredibly proud to be Arabs. Muslims are incredibly proud to be Muslims. Are Americans proud of being Americans? Are Canadians proud of being Canadians? Are Australians proud of being? No. We're taught that that's bad,
Right.
right? We
And
we're
all,
we're we value
yeah,
everyone else but
right,
ourselves.
right. And what, and back to the Jewish thing, American Jews, they don't realize that their confidence, their self-confidence, their pride in who they are, their being able to talk and be free, has a lot to do with their being in Israel. You want to know
Yes.
what's going to happen when there's no Israel to American Jews? It's not going to be pretty.
Hmm.
Even if you're an American citizen, it is not going to be pretty because we know Egyptian citizen Jews, the Polish citizen Jews, the German citizen Jews. What happened?
Hmm.
There was no Israel. With an Israel, they don't realize they have more of a backbone. They have a self-confidence. We have a self-confidence because of Israel. This
Hmm.
is completely ignored. I'm so ashamed of being a Jew. Excuse me?
Hmm.
What the fuck?
I feel the same way about these anti-feminist women. I feel the same way. It's like you have the same way I feel about anti-Zionist Jewish people. It's like you wouldn't even like Zionism serves the anti-Zionist Jews even if they hate it. You know what I mean? Feminism
Exactly.
serves the anti-feminist
Exactly.
women even if they hate it. It's like you can hate it all you want, but I wouldn't even hear
Exactly.
your voice right now. I wouldn't even know that you hate it if it wasn't for feminism or if it wasn't for Zionism. You know what I mean? Like they
That's
don't
right.
even realize that they are still, and it's like yeah, it's diabolical. It's
It is.
diabolical.
It is.
And it's really, really sad. But there are so many comments going on here. I can't keep track of them all, but so many people have many questions for you, and I'm very conscious of the time. And I forgot that we're on a podcast. I've just been chit-chatting with you.
I have
I've
loved this
talked
so much,
so
Yasmine.
much.
You are my hero. You have no idea. I buy your books and hand them out like, pancakes. I mean, I just want everyone to read your book. So this has been amazing for me to have this time with you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I mean, you and I have been following each other for a long time. I've been reading your tweets for a
I
long
know.
time. I've been wanting to have an in-depth conversation with you for a long time because you have so many different experiences from all over the world and you have got such a rich, diverse background. And I've always been really curious, and that's what a lot of people are asking here too about your background and how you this last question here was asking about, oh, I lost it. It's just too many coming down, but somebody was asking something about how did you maintain your sense of self? In my mind, I'm thinking it probably had to do with your grandma. Um, Obviously, your Jewish identity was your foundation,
Mhm.
but every one of the groups that you identified that you talked about, with it, there was rejection. You know,
Mhm.
Egyptian, rejected, Iraqi, rejected, Jewish, or sorry, Japanese, rejected. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
With American progressives, rejected, feminists, rejected, lesbians, rejected. It's like, how do you, how did you deal with all that?
Yeah, I don't know. Tell you the truth, I don't know. Um, in high school, I dealt with it by falling in love. I had two wonderful boyfriends. Um, then there were many hard periods where I really didn't want to live. So it wasn't like, yeah, but I'm a fighter.
Mhm.
And I know one thing, I'm a Jew. And
Mhm.
I have a lot of Jews behind me. I
Mhm.
have so much. And today I was scared. I'm like, how am I going to talk to Yasmine? And how am I going to talk to these people? And I have too much. It's too much. I can't do it. I can't do it. And then I pick up my dad's passport and walk away with my phone in my hand. I don't know what my finger pushed because I didn't have music on. And Alabama Shakes, Brittany Howard's Hold On comes on.
Mm.
I'm like, okay, that is how I survived. It's that way. There is something more than me.
Mhm.
And when it comes in, I tap into it somehow. It taps into me, whether it's my dad who died when I turned 60, who's still there somehow. What? I don't know. But this song with Brittany Howard, just hold on. I don't know how I got here. I don't know how I lived
Mhm.
this long. And she's talking about 22 or whatever. You know,
Mhm.
who knows? But I think that it doesn't matter how many times I wanted to die. It wasn't my time. And I have something in me, some fire in me that keeps me going. But the Jew thing, that has
Mhm.
never been an ambivalence.
Mhm.
It's more than anything. It comes before being a woman, it comes before being a mother, a grandmother, a friend, lesbian, not lesbian, bisexual. I don't give a shit about any of that. I am a Jew first.
Mhm.
That's it.
Mhm.
Without being a Jew, I am nothing. And the Jew has kept me.
Can I suggest an answer to my own question?
Please.
I think it has a lot to do with all of your ancestors before you who also fought continuously. And it's their spirits that persevered and continued and through all of those generations. And then that's how you became That's how you're sitting here now, here today. That's why you exist. That's why the Jewish people exist on the planet today. Such a teeny tiny little 0.02% of the population or something like that. Like,
It is, yes, that's what it is.
yeah. And yet still, what are they doing? They're at the top of information technology, security, science, everything. And so it's like the cream rising to the top, like you had to fight so hard, generation after generation after generation. You have all of those spirits within you. And I think that's why you were able to persevere when most of us, would have buckled under just one of those many things that you were describing to us.
Thank you.
Well, we are going to open it up to questions now, and we are so lucky to have with us a celebrity today, Matthew. Matthew, you're first. Go ahead.
Oh my gosh, that's such an honor coming from you, Yasmine. I'm such a fan and I'm so happy to be here and I'm so happy that you have my dear friend Rachel on. So my question is a little bit similar to yours, Yasmine. Rachel, when you're telling your story of being stateless and not having a home and not having a place, it really strikes me that in a way, that being part of the LGBTQ plus community and also a proud Jew, which doesn't pass the litmus test of being an anti-Zionist, feels a lot like also being stateless. And you know as well as I do that being queer and finding your place within the LGBTQ community can feel like sort of a coming home. And now it feels like that community that created a safe space for us is no longer a safe space. So I'm wondering, does that trigger those old traumas and old feelings of feeling like a stateless person, a person without a home? And if so, how do you navigate that? Thank you.
Yeah, I don't feel safe in progressive spaces anymore. And I'm a progressive, right? But being a Zionist, uh, don't have the passport. I do feel stateless in the LGBTQ community. Absolutely. And here I am, co-owner, founder, co-founder, and owner of a company that charters cruise ships and resorts. We charter the entire thing and fill it with from 35 people on a super, super duper adventure trip to over 2,000 on a big cruise ship. And I travel with a group of friends. I don't go without a group of friends. I snuck you on a recent one. Um, it's just, I have my little Zionist group, all my friends, people I know, people close to me in my life. They are my family now that I don't have my parents anymore. But I still feel stateless. I mean, I have an American passport. It's great. I can travel. You know, my first 20 some years of my life, I couldn't travel. That Red Cross paper was good for a very limited amount of time. So yes, I have a passport. I am an American citizen. Israel is my homeland, but I'm not an Israeli. I go as often as I can. If I can go twice a year, I'm good. But I mean, in Israel, talk about being seen. Half of Israel are Arabic Jews or Jews from Arab lands or however you want to call it. And Israel, the Ashkenazi in Israel are turning Mizrahi because guess where Israel is located?
Middle East.
All gonna be, it's a Mizrahi Jewish country. And people bemoaned it forever. Oh, the Mizrahim they've ruined our music. I like, what music? Your Polish Russian music? Oh, they ruined our food. What food? It's like, give me a break. We are from everywhere and we're together here now. And guess where we're together here now? In the Middle East. So Ah, feeling stateless. I will die feeling stateless. I am stateless. There's no, I know, for a little moment in time when I joined the whole feminist lesbian community, I felt, ooh, I belong. Well, that changed very quickly. I mean, I came out in 1975, 76. By 78, I'm making my own group because guess what? They're into Arafat. So Matthew, I'll always feel stateless, and that's why I need you.
Thank you. Thank you for answering so beautifully. And you always got me. So
Thank you.
if I can make you feel like you have a home or a state, I'm there because
You
you,
do.
just so you know, and that so everybody knows, and myself, and I feel like many other Mizrahi LGBTQ plus Jews, I personally, I look up to you, Rachel. So thank you for all that you do. Thank you for your voice. Thank you for your openness and your realness because it keeps people like me going. So thank you.
Wow.
And Matthew, you're from Iran?
Yeah, my family's from Iran.
Yeah,
I was born in London, but my family
yeah.
went there from Iran.
Because we've been talking a lot about Arab people, like Jewish people living in Arab lands and how they were ethnically cleansed. And we talked about the Farhud and we talked about Rachel's dad and losing his passport and things like that. But Iranian Jews in Iran had just as difficult of a history. In fact, there is shocking anti-Semitism in Iran. We had a guest recently who grew up in Iran, a Jewish man, where who was telling us about it. And since we have you here, um, I'm wondering if what your relationship is with Iran, your family's relationship with Iran, is it similar to to Rachel's family's stories?
Um, no, well, no. First of all, I think it's important to identify that the timing was really different. When Jews fled en masse from Iran, it was in the late 70s, early 80s. Whereas when Jews were forced to leave all of these Arab countries, it was during the 40s and 50s, right? So during that time, excuse me, it was during the Pahlavi era, which we call sort of the golden era for Jews, because it was like the first time Jews were let out of the ghettos, the first time Jews were able to own businesses essentially and be equals. So when you talk to people like my parents' generation and even my grandparents' generation, they really miss that Iran. Um,
Mhm.
Unfortunately, what happened was when the Islamic Republic regime came in and took over, that's when things got very, very muddy and very messy, and Jews left very quickly. I don't think people realize that the first civilian execution that took place was the wealthiest, most well-known Jewish community leader, um, El Ghanian, um, and that sent the message to the Jewish community. So within, I think, 6 months of the revolution, something like 70% of the Jewish population left. They just left everything. Um, and then it was this sort of slow trickling out. They made it really, really difficult. So my father and his family left prior to the revolution, but my mother's, and I was born in London, obviously outside of Iran, but I grew up watching my mother go through and deal with all of the traumas that came with being separated from her parents, her siblings, her entire family. And as you know, being Middle Eastern, it's not just your parents and your siblings, it's your
Yeah.
cousins, your aunts, your uncles. We're all one.
Mhm.
So I grew up sort of watching her take these trips to different parts of Europe as one member of the family got out or the other to go see them. Um, the worry, the concern, the trauma over what's happening with my mother since my father's been separated from her. Her father had to travel, be smuggled out and through Pakistan where he had a stroke and then he was stuck there for 6 months. So that's the kind of thing that I grew up watching and dealing with. So there are definite similarities. There's definitely, I think, as somebody who grew up in London and Los Angeles, um, the child of Iranian refugees, essentially immigrants, who's Jewish, though I wasn't stateless in the same way Rachel was. There was this sense of feeling stateless. I mean, it's a great way to put it. I mean, when you look at the fact I'm LGBTQ plus, Jewish, from a conservative family, conservative background. In England specifically, I was the one of maybe a handful of Mizrahi kids in an Ashkenazi Jewish school. Culturally, we were worlds apart, even though all of our prayers were the same. Um, so it was difficult. It's difficult.
Mhm. Wow. Thank you so much, Matthew. You really gave us a real understanding of that whole devastating situation. But yeah, hopefully the Islamic regime of Iran will be flattened very soon and the Iranian people will be free, including the Iranian Jewish people, because I know that despite everything, Jewish Iranians are still very proud of their country. They're very proud of their culture and their traditions, and it would be really beautiful for them to be able to return and to live together once again as it was back in the old golden times under Pahlavi. So
I don't know
thank
if
you.
that would happen again, to be honest, and I have to name that. I feel like a lot of Iranian Jews, they it's almost like when we say intergenerational trauma, I feel like a lot of us have this intergenerational, not necessarily trauma, but this, and I think this is for Jews across the board, intergenerational idea of sort of being nomadic, and you
Yeah.
put your roots down and settle where you do, and then when you have to leave, you leave, you move on, and you take on the identity of wherever you are. So I feel like certainly in Los Angeles, where I live, the massive Iranian Jewish population they're good. They're settled here and that's it. I don't know if they're necessarily looking backwards, but I know that for many, especially of the older generation, they are very much attached to their Iranian identity. When I moved here, one of my mom's aunts sat me down and specifically told me, "You are Persian, never forget that you are Persian." And then Jewish came second. So it's an interesting dynamic. But thank you
Okay.
for having me. Thank you for giving me the space
Yeah.
to speak.
Thank you so much, Matthew. All right, Mars, you're next.
Thank you, Yasmin. Hi, Rachel.
Mars.
The question I have for you is, I remember meeting you a few years ago when at an interfaith dinner, and we were meeting back then in a very, very progressive space, one that I think neither you or I will be welcome in again because of the recent circumstances and everything of the sort. Even back then, things were a little, to put it very nicely, weird, but progressing everything that we've been through to the current day, I've been speaking out at school board meetings and having a lot of conversations with people. And one of the more mind-blowing things I've ever encountered was when I had an unpleasant encounter with one school board member who was Jewish and actually said something along the lines of regarding the whole Jews are white thing. She actually came out flat out and said Jews are white passing, which I thought was absolutely bonkers considering the kind of anti-Semitism that was just out there. You're aware of the incredible diversity of Jews in Israel and all over. We like the Mizrahim, along with the Ashkenazi, the Sephardic, and even the Ethiopians. Our mutual friend Benny Shufutinsky, she's a Black Jew, and there's a lot of people out there who do not understand that Jews are simply not white. They come from a diverse series of ethnic backgrounds. You've interacted with a lot of people who, I trust you've spoken to a lot of people in order to put this idea out there that you're dealing with a diverse group. What's been their reaction when they learn that Jews aren't white? They come from this all these diverse backgrounds. Does it change their idea that Jews are white colonizers in Israel, that kind of nonsense? Like, does that help shift the narrative in any way, shape, or form? That narrative that Jews are white colonizers is absolutely insane. I'm just wondering if this perspective putting it in space does anything to rock the boat and to think that, hey, maybe we got this wrong, or what's been your experience there?
I think is it mostly a yes, but.
What?
Yes, but. Yeah, sure, I know, but no legitimacy to come and take over somebody else's land. So, and Jews being white, I have had that argument with so many people, and it's complicated, because this whole white thing in America and in Canada, I imagine, and England, many places now, there's black and white mentality. You're black or you're white. I mean, Asians don't exist. You're black or white. Way back in the 70s, I had a woman, she was Chinese American lesbian, and and she was told that she's white. So it's insanity, okay? I don't even know how to explain this. Yes, some of my friends, people that I've spent years with, they start to go, yes, oh yeah, you're not white, but it does not compute. When I worked in a gay mental health clinic, my best friend, who is Puerto Rican and has very, 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 very white skin, and me, right, the Jew, has brown skin. I was considered white. She's considered a woman of color. It's craziness. I don't know what to say. It
Wow.
doesn't. And you go to Israel, it's filled with brown Jews, right? But some of those brown Jews are Ashkenazi. So it's like you look at Arabs, they're not one color. There's very light-skinned Arabs, Muslim Arabs, Christian Arabs, very dark ones. Same with Jews. You cannot do the color thing that somehow in America, it's a very different slavery. African Americans, it's a really, I don't even know how to speak about this. But personally, do people look at me as a woman of color or uh, anything but white? No. No, I am considered white. I'm looked at as white, and it doesn't matter how long I've known those people. In fact, and because I speak English so well, nobody ever remembers that I didn't come to America till I was an adult. Don't you remember this TV show and that TV show? I don't know. The minds are small, but I'm
Wow.
white. And then there was this whole thing with the education, and then there's ethnic studies stuff that's going on, which is actually a horror show, and arguments with Jews who know about everything you just said, who've been to Israel, who know all these things. Yeah, but Jews have white privilege. What do you do with that?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mars. Tochi, you're next.
Hey, Yasmine, and hey, Rachel. Thanks for speaking today. I loved your comments, particularly about Japan. I have been to Japan, and and we went to a smaller city called Wakayama, and it's interesting because it's not too far from Kobe. So when you were talking about how um, you can be like an outsider in a place instantly. I was like, yeah, I know what you mean. Because when you're in Tokyo, it's great. I mean, obviously, but
Right.
the moment you start going to some of these smaller cities, it's like, and the only reason we were there was because we had uh, we actually we took care of like these two Japanese girls who were like studying English here at our place in Toronto, and so they returned the favor many years later when they were like, "Hey, if you're ever in Japan, come see us."
Mm,
So my point is that what you're saying resonated with me because I can completely see where you're coming from.
yeah.
Um, and so my question was, considering how many feminists abandoned the Jewish community on October 7th, do you consider these feminists to be frauds overall or just frauds when it comes to Jews only? Is it, like, is it sort of hyper focused or is there just a general, um, like, do you, when they may perhaps express their feminism or thoughts around other groups of people, do you now question that as well?
Mm, interesting. Yeah, I think the fraud, yes, yes, I think it is a fraudulent feminism and a very uh, what's the word? Depending on the circumstance. I mean, if they think Linda Sarsour is a feminist, I really don't know what to say. If they think it's just cultural that Afghani girls can't go to school and can't open their mouth in public, well, what do you say? They don't care. And this whole Israel thing, they just get all riled up and mobilized around it. And why is that? Why is that? So, do I see them as feminists? Actually, right now, no.
Yeah, that's fair.
Where's the
I
feminism? Where is the feminism? Where
yeah,
is
I
the
agree. No, I agree. And I think it's I mean October 7 obviously I think changed the world in a lot of ways. Even I would argue look, as a black male, I notice it in black community groups who I would argue pretend to be for black folk, but then when you look deeper, you're like, oh, actually, you're fraudulent too, because you're supporting terrorists, and like you actually going further, you don't even care about black people. It's a grift too, and so I find that I've really started to interrogate everything across the board because it's like if you can't really understand this one scenario that is so really black and white, to use the term, it's like then what do you really understand at all, if that makes sense?
Yeah, well, so here's this black feminist. She's a feminist. She's absolutely a feminist. She's lived her life as a feminist. She's a feminist. I mean, I can't just say, okay, she's not. The way I look at her now is different. But so she's a black woman. She's a proud black woman. She's a brilliant black woman. And on October 9th, and I know she's been an anti-Zionist for a long time, but we have, an acquaintance, a professional relationship. I sent her I think it was the Israeli woman that was being dragged into the car with the bloody sweatpants. And the answer was, don't send me this. Black people are still wrapping their minds around George Floyd. What's that supposed to mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I still don't know. What is that supposed to mean? I don't care about Jews I mean, that's what I get. And I don't care about Jewish women being raped, and go fuck yourself. That's what I got. And I
And to be
tried
honest,
to engage further, and it was like, forget it. So no, we don't
I,
talk anymore.
Yeah, and I would argue she doesn't care about black people either. I hate to say it because the truth of the matter is if you pay attention to what over black folk overall and the issues that we deal with in Africa with jihadism, which is wild, and the slave trade that's still going on in Libya,
Yeah.
Mauritania, which is wild, Tunisia, you can't tell me that you care about black folk, but then not pay attention to how Iranian proxies are, running amok in Africa. It just doesn't compute.
Mm,
Anyway, I've taken so much
yeah.
time. I really appreciate your talk. Thank you.
Thanks.
I just wanted to interject a little bit here before we go on to the next person, Rachel, and to what Tochi was saying at the end there. In Gaza, there is a neighborhood called El Abid. Do people know this? That's where the black people live. El Abid means the slaves. Yeah, because that is the term, that is the word that is used to describe black people is slaves. So when a black American thinks that they are on the right side of history or something, thinks that they are being, I don't know, thinks that they're being what when they jump on this, anti-Israel, pro-Palestine bandwagon. They think they're doing the right thing because Jews are white or Jews are the oppressors, and these little brown folk, they're the ones who are the oppressed, and they're the good ones. I hope that they pay attention to the truth, which is that their people in Palestine, in Gaza, are called slaves. Ari, you're next.
Well,
Thank you, Yasmine. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Hi, Rachel. I followed you on JIMENA for quite a while, and Matthew, you as well. Thank you for all the great work you guys do. My my father's family is also they're also Baghdadi Jews. They went to India and Singapore as well. So
Wow.
probably we have some connections.
Absolutely. Yeah, they all knew each other.
You probably you could be related. There's
It
some.
could be. I'm sure there could be some relations. Yeah.
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 What I was wondering is, like, I guess maybe Matthew, you also could talk more about JIMENA, the organization, a bit. Um, but can we create more bridges between ex-Muslim groups and groups like what Yasmine has created, and also Clarity Coalition, and groups like JIMENA,
Wow,
and
there's
make it
nothing
more
I would
formal relationships?
I'll have to ask that Matthew will have to answer that question. But for me, that would be a dream come true. You know, when I meet Arab Muslims who are Zionists, I can't tell you. It connects it all up. It connects it all up. And I'm not divided. So that is like on every level, you know, my personal little tiny level and worldwide level, that would be amazing. I love your idea. If we can do something with that idea, oh my God.
Yeah, because
Matthew,
I keep
Matthew,
feeling
is
like
there
we're so
anything going
isolated,
on?
you know.
Yes,
Yeah.
Matthew, is there anything going on around that?
I mean, it's a difficult one because there, I mean, there's Shiraka, which we know, I presume everybody knows about. It's a delegation of Arabs from various countries who are pro-Israel. It came about after the Abraham Accords, and also Israelis, and they're a group that goes and speaks, and we've worked with them at JIMENA. But outside of that, there aren't too many organized sort of organizations or NGOs that are specifically about this. And yeah, we're always open to bridge building because as an organization that represents and advances the history and heritage of Mizrahi and Sephardic Jews from the Middle East to North Africa, we have the capability of being that bridge because there's similarity in language, similarity in culture, there's an understanding there. So yes, it's something that we're always open to, and we have hosted events with Muslim and Arab organizations, but there's always this sort of Zionism issue that kind of comes up with a lot of those organizations. So if anybody knows of any specific organizations that are Muslim or Arab that are not anti-Israel and looking to specifically build those bridges, we're absolutely open to that.
Yeah. So I'm
Yeah.
co-founder and co-director of an organization that Ari just mentioned called the Clarity Coalition. So you and I can speak about this offline, Matthew, but absolutely would love to build bridges together, and our coalitions can absolutely support each other.
Let's get that collaboration going, Yasmine. We're
Really?
so
Mm.
I did have one other small question. And I know, Rachel, you have a kind of a Maghrebi and connection there with on the Egyptian side. Do you find, I know there are still some Tunisian Jews left in Tunisia. I've heard this, but I was wondering, do you know, is there much significant difference between the Jewish experience in North Africa versus on the Levant? Because it seems like things were worse in like areas like Syria and Iraq than they were. I mean, even things were bad in the Maghreb, but not as bad, perhaps. I don't know if that's even right to say, but
No, you're right. I mean, I don't think it was as bad. There was no Farhud, right, in Egypt. I mean, there were, you know, my dad said, you
Well,
know, we know that there were pogroms. There were things. Listen, a Jew needed to know his and her place, okay?
yeah.
You had to know your place. And that was definitely under. You were under the thumb, no matter what, under. But I think Iraq and maybe Syria. They're more, it was more isolated. Egypt was very international for a while.
Mm.
My dad went to a Catholic school in Mansoura with Greek kids, Italian kids. There were other, and upper middle class Muslim kids. They went to the Catholic school because there was no Jewish school in Mansoura. But he didn't have the fear my mother had. He
Mm.
did not have the fear when like my mother said, coming home from school in those narrow alleyways in Baghdad, and any Muslim could jump up and pinch her breasts, right? They could do whatever they wanted,
Mhm.
and they knew that. I think it was different in Egypt in my father's time, but he remembers a great great grandfather whose farm was taken away because he was a Jew. He had no recourse. So the horror stories I heard that was personally happened to my family were more on my mother's side.
Yeah, and I'm also wondering that particularly like you see a place like Syria and Iraq that where you had these minority groups like the Alawis and in Syria and the Sunnis in Iraq, where you have this dynamic that you don't have so much in the Maghreb. There seems to be much more uh, cohesiveness in the Maghreb than there is in the Levant. And I'm wondering if that, like you see with Assad, have to keep posturing this very anti-Israel stance constantly, to in a sense to prop up his own regime and his own legitimacy in a way where they're so outnumbered by the Sunnis in Syria, for instance.
Yeah, I'm not an academic. I don't have those answers. I don't really know. I just know from my own family history, it was hell for my mother growing up in Iraq. I mean, even to like going with her father on a little business trip. They went from Baghdad to Basra. And in Basra, he was a date merchant. They were buying dates or selling dates or whatever. And my mother watched the Shia businessman, after doing business with my grandfather, wash his hands because he just did business with a Jew. My father did not witness that in
Mm.
Egypt. So I think it depended on the time and whatever, but Iraq is certainly more isolated and insular than Egypt. I don't know.
Well, thank you, Rachel. Appreciate it.
And you mentioned Morocco, Ari. I think Morocco has when you look at the spectrum of how horrible Jews were treated throughout the Middle East, Morocco is probably going to be where you'd find the least horror stories because the king of Morocco was very clear about not being anti-Semitic, not hating Jewish people. He talked about how he had Jewish people in his family, and so he was not going to stand for it. Whereas, in other countries in Maghreb, like in Algeria, for example, as soon as the French left, they were like, and the Jews follow, like, get out now. No one's here to protect you
Right.
anymore, So it's politics are intertwined in here. And Rachel talked about how the Mufti was in Iraq, and so how that's going to obviously infect the psyche of the people there, bringing the Nazi ideology there too. So it's all different, it's a spectrum, like I said, but unfortunately no part of the spectrum is a good place to be. But yes, some places were worse than others, depending on politics and other issues.
Right. Well, Albert Memmi, who was a Tunisian Jew,
Yes.
he wrote an amazing book called Jews and Arabs, and he was a leftist. He was for independence of Tunisia, all of that, right? And he had to flee because he was a Jew. And he writes, there's a chapter called Arab, What is an Arab Jew? And he says, we could never be an Arab. The Arab part always had to be an adjective. So I've changed it to Arabic because so many people have yelled at me for calling myself an Arab Jew, even though, hey, We spoke Arabic at home. I didn't. I wanted to be American, so I was learning English really, really intensely. So don't talk to me in that language. But I understood every word that they ever said in the house. I grew up with all that cultural baggage, shame, shame, abe, 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 cross your legs, girls don't talk. Yeah. Even though my parents were being modernized and they were being westernized, it was a journey for them as well. And so for me, it's like I grew up with all this cultural stuff. And so I am going to call myself an Arabic Jew. And Albert Memmi in there talks about we were that. We were never allowed to be Arab. Maybe we would all have turned Arab if we were allowed to be without having to become Muslim, right? However, it didn't sound so pretty in Tunisia. I mean, reading Albert Memmi, it sounded horrible and always worse, right, for the poor Jews. And he was not from a rich family. So if you were from a wealthier family, I think you did a lot better. You could navigate better.
Yeah, Memmi's work was great. Colonizer, colonized, and all that.
Yes,
Yeah, really
yes,
excellent.
yeah.
All right,
Thank you.
Esther, you're the last question, and then we're going to have to wrap it up because we've already taken much more of Rachel's time than I requested.
Yeah, thanks, Yasmin. Rachel, thank you so much for sharing your story. Really appreciate it. So my question is like, when you first arrived in America, did you feel acceptance by American Jews? And if not, how did you navigate that rejection?
So when I first came, I was extremely excited, right? Because first of all, what a big community of foreigners. I mean, to me, we were all foreigners in Japan, and then I come and it's like it's a country of foreigners who aren't foreigners, who are Americans. Now, the American Jews found me as a curiosity, and there was a multitude of responses. The best was, "Oh, you're so exotic," which actually was very invalidating because I felt like all Jews were the same and we were one. And I am identifying with Jews and wanting to become an American Jew and thrilled about it. And they're looking at me like, well, you're not really a Jew, right? Because if your family's from Egypt and Iraq, then you're not really Jewish. And if you never had bagels and cream cheese, you're never really Jewish. And to this day, I mean, people go, don't you love Jewish food? And I said, what food are you talking about? Because if you're talking about bagels and lox, no, I don't. I actually don't like it. And I love matzo ball soup. That's the only Ashkenazi food I like. But what happened to me coming here, 6 months into being here, I wanted to go back to my family. I didn't want to be here anymore. I was not seen as a Jew. I was not understood. Um, and I had grown up in a community with mostly Mizrahi Jews, actually, very small Jewish community of like 55 at max, and some Ashkenazis, but I always thought all Jews were one and we were one people and we had one, and now we have Israel, so forth and so on. But I came here and I mean, I never heard of a nose job in LA, in the dorm. People were putting up pictures of before the nose job and after the nose job, and the Jews were so confident about being American Los Angeles Jews, and they really weren't interested in my history past the first maybe 10 minutes. And then it was like, oh, well, so you're not really Jewish.
Yeah. So I mean, like confronted with that, like how did you,
How did I navigate that?
yeah, or find
Well,
community
I didn't
or
navigate it well, really, honestly. I wanted to go back home. I wanted to go back to Japan. My parents wouldn't let me. They said, no, no future here. You need to stay. And God willing, inshallah, we will join you as soon as possible. Luckily for me, they did join me like 4 years later. But I cried and cried and cried and really wanted to go home. I was not happy. When they came here, I had enough of the mirroring I needed and the self-confidence I needed to then really live my life, raise my child, go back to school, have a divorce, go back to school, join other communities, start thinking, reading, writing, connecting, putting words to my experience, writing so much about being a Mizrahi Jew. So I think writing, I mean, one of the things that keeps me going is writing. Still to this day, I blog, I put my blogs out, the Times of Israel. I probably wouldn't survive without writing.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Esther. That was a really good question. That's something I try to do on this podcast a lot, is invite as many Mizrahi Jews as I possibly can, because being born and raised in Canada, we do hear a lot about the Ashkenazi experience. In my daughter's school, they did learn how to make what is wrong with my brain today? Latkes with sour cream and applesauce, and you know what I mean? Like, it was all everything that she learned about Jewish community, Jewish life, Jewish world was all very Ashkenazi. And that's just the way it is when you're in the West, because they are the majority of people here, obviously.
It's dominant. That's dominant.
They are the dominant. Yeah, they're the dominant Jewish community. Yeah, of course. And especially after October 7th, I found that it was really easy, as somebody was mentioning here, I think it was Mars, that whole idea of the colonizers and, white Jews and da-da-da. It was easy to create that little, to stick Jews in this little paradigm and to make them out to be the big bad white guys, the white guys. So that's why I'm trying to invite as many people from, like yourself, Mizrahi Jews, where the family is from Yemen and Iraq and Syria and Egypt and Morocco, et cetera, to try and bring your stories more over here in the West. Because, obviously, as you mentioned, in Israel, the dominant, it's Mizrahi Jews are much more dominant than the Ashkenazi Jews. But so I'm trying to bring those stories over here so that we can sort of start to recognize, again, as Mars was saying, Jewish people are from all over. And we even had Yirmiyahu on here, whose mom is from the Caribbean.
Right.
So it's like there's so many different stories, or Ethiopian Jews, like we're not hearing stories of Jewish people from all over the world. We're getting a lot of the Ashkenazi stories, which are very important, obviously, but it's also important to step back and get a more of a global view, because then you can't create these little scenarios where you can pretend that Jews are white and you can pretend that they're colonizers, and we can just forget all of the thousands of years of history, forget that Jesus was actually a Jew born in Israel, raised in Nazareth, let's just forget all that. And now we're going to just, it's almost like they're superimposing the American experience of being colonizers and, the Aboriginals and and they're like, oh, I know this story. We're going to just do the same thing here. Just, exchange the characters. And instead of Aboriginals, it's Palestinians. Instead of big bad white Europeans, it's big bad white Jews, and it's obviously, in my opinion, it's not only ignorance, it's narcissism, because they're just not interested in learning beyond. They're not interested in lifting their eyes from their navel. They're just like stuck, with their navel gazing. Yep. And they just don't want to learn. They just don't want to understand. Like, this has nothing to do with you. This is your whole paradigm that you've got there is your business. That's your experience. That has absolutely nothing to do with what we're talking about here. You don't know the first thing about the Jewish experience or the history of Israel. And so I hope by bringing you here, I hope more people will start to recognize and understand and learn how culturally diverse the Jewish experience has been, and how globally you've made such an impact on the world, and how we need to understand a lot more than just the Ashkenazi Jewish experience in order to understand the Jewish people.
Well, Yasmine, thank you. Beyond I can't thank you enough. I'm just gonna go plop myself on the couch after this and just take it all. But, to everything you've just said, I'm gonna quote my dad, who would be sitting here with a big smile on his face and just say, Inshallah.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Rachel. I know I've taken so much of your time today. I just want to ask you one final question before I let you go. I just want to make sure that there aren't any like parting words or words of advice or anything that you want to share with the audience. Where can we follow you? Where can we read what your blogs? Anything you want to tell us before we let you go?
Okay. So my blogs are mostly all on the Times of Israel blogs. I have my own little blog space. And I tweet a lot. And yeah, I'm, preparing for your show. I'm going to do the book because I now have my outline. I mean, I was trying
Yay!
to remember
So many
everything.
people said that in the comments,
Yeah,
by the way.
the way you asked the questions that you made me think about, yeah, it became the entire life, and it was a lot. But and I just have all these notes because you brought up so much in me. So yeah, thank you. I love you, Yasmine. I love
Oh.
you. I love you. I love you.
Thank you. I love you, Rachel. Thank you so much. I'm really, really, I feel so honored that I inspired you to finally write your story because I know how you feel. It's a lot and there's a lot to unpack and
Yeah.
it's gonna be very emotionally draining on you, but it's gonna be so worth it and it's gonna be a gift to anyone who reads it, a gift to the world. So thank you so much for doing that. And I can't wait to read it and we'll definitely have you back on to speak more about your history when you write that book. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rachel. And thank you everyone for joining us here today. And we'll see you at the next Yasmine Mohammed podcast. Take care, everyone. Bye. Bye, Matthew.
After hearing all that, you might be left wondering, what can I do? How can I help? Well, this is why I created a nonprofit called Free Hearts, Free Minds. We are the only organization dedicated exclusively to helping these free thinkers. We empower them with our programs and supportive community, lifting them up so they can heal, speak out, and begin to make positive changes, not just in their own lives, but within the broader community around them. If this is a cause that resonates with you and you want to make a difference, one way to do that is by donating to Free Hearts, Free Minds. Because not enough people care about this cause, we need people like you to help fuel this change. You can donate via our website, freeheartsfreeminds.com. Thank you. Every dollar you donate makes a difference.